The fate of three young women was shrouded in the mystery of their sudden disappearance. One, it turned out, had never been officially reported, as if she had never existed. Another left behind only a tattered diary full of unspoken thoughts. And the third, the most enigmatic, didn't even have a name in the records. The public at the time whispered that they had simply run away, seeking freedom, but the truth, far grimmer, remained buried beneath an old chapel for over 4 decades. This was a story desperately sought to be forgotten, and the tragedy of a girl whose name was erased from memory, her body laid to rest without identification. The October wind, carrying the whisper of dry leaves, rustled along the gravel path as Emily Carter, driving her rented car, pulled up directly in front of Blackwood Academy's massive gates. Above, on the ancient wrought iron archway, the school's faded Latin motto, Sapientia et Silentium, wisdom and silence, was still faintly discernible. This phrase, Emily grimly noted to herself, seemed strangely fitting for a place that had been in complete disuse for over a decade. Stepping out of the car, she instinctively pulled her coat tighter, seeking some defense against the piercing October chill that bit to the bone. The trees lining the ancient stone wall still held the last flashes of vibrant autumn colors, though most had long since shed their leaves, revealing skeletal branches reaching towards the low, overcast sky. Ahead, like specters of the past, loomed the buildings, stately Victorian structures, painted in shades of gray, conveying an impression of solemnity and permanence. Demolition crews weren't due to arrive for another month, a circumstance that afforded Emily ample time to complete her mission. Meticulously documenting and cataloging any materials of archival value before the relentless wrecking ball began its work. Emily Carter had been within these walls before, but only once, and her role then had been entirely different, far removed from the duties of an archivist. That memory, though considerably blurred by the passage of time and deep trauma, still resonated somewhere deep within her ribs, like an invisible imprint of the past. She had spent exactly 1 semester at Blackwood in the distant year of 1997 as a student. Her mother had taken her away without explanation, and since then, no one in their family had ever spoken of that period again. Now, at 28, recently laid off from a museum position in New York City, Emily Carter had accepted a private contract from the school board. This was partly driven by financial necessity, but more so by an insatiable desire to find answers to questions no one in her family had ever dared to ask aloud. First, she had to register with the site manager, a certain Johnson, a gruff man who seemed to spend most of his workday in a heated trailer, engrossed in job listings. "Just don't go into the chapel," he warned, not even bothering to look up. "There's serious structural damage in there, and the 3rd floor is sealed off entirely. Black mold everywhere." "I'll stick to where it's safe," Emily Carter replied calmly. He didn't ask about the purpose of her visit, and she, in turn, offered no explanations. Inside the buildings, the air was even colder than outside, chilling her to the bone. Emily put on her gloves, but even through the soles of her boots, she felt the penetrating cold as she walked down the main corridor. She passed dust-laden trophies, stern portraits of former headmasters, and along dark, wood-paneled walls where only empty hooks now gaped, once proudly displaying student banners. She began her work in the library. Of all the school's structures, this room had best withstood the past decade of disuse. Rows of massive oak shelves still stood firm, and the windows, though clouded with years of grime, still let in enough daylight to cast dim, golden rays onto the dusty book stacks. Emily Carter unzipped her bag and pulled out her digital camera, a notepad, and a brand-new folder neatly labeled Blackwood, Archival Search. The books filling the shelves were nothing remarkable, just outdated scientific treatises, dust-covered classics, and numerous student yearbooks. Emily flipped through a few, noting pencil inscriptions on the end papers. "Ashley, don't forget who you are. Love, Miss Thompson. Ryan, you'll be a great lawyer someday." These small, touching human touches seemed particularly vivid in such a cold and abandoned space. It was then that her gaze caught something unusual. In the farthest corner of the library, behind an overturned chair and a collapsed shelf, was a section of wall that looked completely unnatural. The bricks here didn't match the rest of the masonry. They were noticeably newer, cleaner, and laid slightly unevenly, betraying unprofessional work. Emily Carter crouched down and ran her gloved fingers along the edge of the brickwork. Someone had clearly bricked up part of the wall, but done so hastily, and the mortar was already cracking in several places. She stood up, hesitated for a moment, then pulled a small crowbar from her equipment bag. It was meant for opening crates, not demolishing walls. But when she wedged it between two bricks and applied pressure, the brick yielded with a soft, muffled groan. It took 20 minutes and considerable effort, but eventually, Emily Carter cleared a small opening and peered inside. It wasn't a corridor. It was a room, a hidden room. She widened the opening just enough to squeeze through. The space behind the wall was small, perhaps 2.5 by 2.5 meters, and completely dark, save for the faint light filtering through the hole she had made. The air was stale and heavy, thick with the smell of mold and decaying paper. Inside, there was only one item, a small square table. Emily Carter's heart beat faster as she approached it. The table was wooden, scratched and covered with a thin layer of dust. But what made her pause was the item neatly resting on it, a leather-bound diary. She carefully picked it up. The cover was cracked with age, and the name engraved on the inside of the first page read, Olivia Bennett. Winter semester 1979. Emily Carter's breath hitched. Olivia Bennett. The name scratched at her memory like a shard of a forgotten dream. She had heard it before, in snippets of whispers or old newspaper clippings, a girl who went missing during a blizzard in 1979. One of Blackwood's great unspoken tragedies. Officially, the case read, ran away. But the students in town had always believed otherwise, and now her diary lay here, before her. Emily Carter carefully placed it in her bag, as if afraid it would vanish if she blinked. She turned to leave but stopped when the light caught a glint of metal beneath the table. She knelt down and reached underneath. Lying on the ground was a rusty locket in the shape of a small keyhole. No chain, no explanation. She put it in her pocket. That night, in a rented cottage near town, Emily Carter sat at the kitchen table and opened the diary. The first entry was dated January 8, 1979. They told me I couldn't talk about what happened Christmas Eve, but I don't care. If anyone finds this, maybe they'll believe me. Maybe they'll know I didn't run away. Not yet. Something is wrong with this school. It started in the chapel. I heard her singing again last night. Emily Carter's fingers trembled slightly as she turned the page. The handwriting was neat and clear, but beneath that neatness, panic was palpable. They say she doesn't exist, but I saw her. I swear I saw her. She was standing behind the altar when the candles went out. She whispered my name. Emily Carter leaned back in her chair. The chapel, the one Johnson had emphatically told her not to enter. A coincidence? She flipped forward a few entries. Miss Davis kept me after class again for ranting. That's what she calls it. But I saw Ashley's schedule. She was removed from morning chapel service. That's how it starts. They remove you from chapel, and then you disappear. I think they're watching me. I think someone is reading this diary. If I go missing, I didn't leave. I didn't run away. I would never leave Abigail Stone. Emily Carter closed the book. Abigail Stone? This name was completely unfamiliar to Emily. Another student. She immediately opened her laptop and delved into a search of local archives. There were news articles about Olivia's disappearance, but none mentioned another missing girl named Abigail Stone. There were no death records, no transfer files, absolutely nothing. That night, Emily slept restlessly, her dreams filled with creaking floorboards and faint voices humming old hymns. When she awoke, she found herself clutching her phone as if it were a lifeline. Outside, the wind had picked up, mercilessly scattering dry leaves across the porch. Something tapped at the window once, then again. Emily Carter went to the door and looked out. A single ivy vine, dark green despite the biting cold, was creeping across the gravel directly towards her cottage. The morning sun weakly filtered through Emily Carter's kitchen window, catching dancing dust motes in its rays and illuminating the edge of Olivia Bennett's diary. It lay exactly where she had left it the previous evening, its cover now slightly warped from the damp air that permeated everything in this small town. The smell of mold was faint but persistent, a quiet gift from Blackwood that had followed her home. Emily Carter absently stirred her coffee, her eyes fixed on the first page of her notepad, where she had jotted down points. Olivia Bennett, 1979, presumed runaway, mentions another girl, Abigail Stone, no school records found. Claims someone whispered her name in the chapel, reports being watched. And at the bottom, circled, chapel closed. Why? She circled the last sentence. Then her gaze fell on the locket she had found. Keyhole-shaped, small enough to fit, perhaps, in a medallion. It was tarnished and rough to the touch. It didn't look valuable, but it clearly meant something to someone. Her fingers hovered over her phone, debating whether to call the local archive again. She had already left one message. The woman who answered the landline sounded as if she had been woken up. Instead, Emily Carter grabbed her bag and zipped the diary inside. It was time to go back. By late morning, a fog had settled over Blackwood, like a heavy, impenetrable shroud. Gravel crunched under her boots as she walked through the yard. Her breath plumed in the cold air. A flock of birds scattered noisily from the roof of the East Dormitory as she passed. Inside the main building, the atmosphere felt even heavier, more oppressive. She paused at the foot of the stairs, looking up at the third floor, which was still cordoned off with yellow tape and a handwritten sign that read, "Mold, do not enter." Maybe later, she whispered to herself. Emily turned towards the west wing. The chapel was at the very end of the corridor, past the music rooms. Most of the lights in the hallway no longer worked, plunging the space into semi-darkness. Her flashlight beam swept across faded frescoes of saints and Latin scripture, barely illuminating them. When she reached the arched wooden doors of the chapel, she expected to see a lock or some barrier. There was nothing, only a faint trace of white paint on the doorknob, likely left by whoever marked it for demolition. Emily Carter hesitated. Olivia Bennett had mentioned seeing someone there, hearing a voice whisper her name. Emily Carter didn't believe in ghosts. Not really, but she believed in stories buried under silence. She pushed the door open. The chapel was cold, vast, and still. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, depicting saints and angels whose eyes had faded with time, giving them a spectral appearance. The wooden pews were intact but covered in thick layers of dust. At the far end stood the altar, richly adorned, though rotted at its base. Faded velvet fabric hung unevenly from it, adding to the scene of desolation. Emily Carter stepped inside and allowed the door to close behind her, immersing herself in absolute silence. She took a few cautious steps forward. Her boots echoed faintly on the stone floor. .NUS. There were no signs of structural collapse, but in the far right of the chapel, there was an area with boarded-up windows and discolored walls. This was likely due to water damage. She began to survey the space with her phone camera, taking pictures as she went. Then she noticed a small door behind the altar. It was almost hidden by the drapery and set lower than usual, as if leading to a crawl space or a storage room. A brass knob protruded from its center. Emily knelt beside it and tried it. Locked, but something was carved into the knob, a keyhole, small, unusual. Emily Carter's pulse quickened. She reached into her bag and pulled out the locket. She held it to the keyhole, a perfect fit. With a gentle turn, something inside clicked. She opened the door. Behind it lay a narrow passage, dusty and shadowed. The air smelled old, damper than in the chapel. Perhaps it was a service staircase. She turned on her flashlight. The stairs led down into what appeared to be an older part of the building's foundation. As Emily slowly descended, her light revealed stone walls, worn and stained by time. The passage turned once, then opened into a rectangular room. Emily Carter stepped inside. The room was empty. Stone floor, stone walls, no windows. But what struck her were the inscriptions, carved into the stone with something like a nail or a piece of metal. Names, dozens of them. Olivia, Abigail, Ashley, Sarah, others, some partially crossed out, others circled, and beneath it all, in shaky handwriting, "No one leaves until they are forgotten." Emily Carter slowly backed away. Her hand touched the wall and came away stained with black mold. She quickly turned and hurried back up the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. She closed the hidden door behind her and moved away from the altar, suddenly aware of how still the chapel remained, as if holding its breath. Then her phone vibrated. She fumbled it out of her coat pocket. One new voicemail from the town archives. She pressed play. "Yes. Hi, Miss Carter. This is Karen from the town hall. You were asking about a girl named Abigail Stone. I think you should come in. There are no school records, but we found a birth certificate and an unregistered death report. No official costs. It was never completed. Just a note. Family declined investigation. One more thing. The document says Abigail Stone. Is that the name you gave me? Because it looks like she and Olivia were sisters." Emily Carter sat in her car outside the Springfield Town Hall, staring blankly at the building's pale brick facade. The voicemail replayed in her mind, over and over. Abigail Stone. She and Olivia were sisters. Two sisters, one missing, the other forgotten. Abigail's name hadn't appeared in any school documents, no yearbook she'd scanned, no student roster she'd photographed. And yet, the woman from the archives had found a birth certificate and an unregistered death report, a ghost in the paperwork, an unseen shadow of the past. Emily Carter got out of her car and walked up the steps to the building. Inside, A bell jingled above the front door, announcing her arrival. The room smelled of dust and toner, creating the atmosphere of an old archive. A gray-haired secretary looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Are you Emily Carter?" "Yes, from the Blackwood Project. Come with me." She led Emily Carter to a back room where 2 manila folders lay on a table, waiting. The secretary sat down, her arms crossed. "I didn't say this in the message, but I was a Blackwood student myself. Class of '83. Olivia Bennett was a few years older than me. Everyone talked about her when she disappeared. Did you know her?" "Not well, but I remember her. Tall, quiet, smarter than most." "And Abigail?" The secretary opened the first folder. She was listed on Olivia's birth certificate. A twin sister, born 3 minutes apart. Emily Carter leaned in. The document was faded but intact, as if holding an old secret. Olivia Bennett and Abigail Stone, born February 3, 1962. Mother Grace Bennett. Father unknown. They weren't identical, but they were always together, until they weren't. "And the death report?" Emily Carter asked softly, a sense of dread building. The secretary pushed the second folder forward. Unregistered, never signed by a medical examiner. No autopsy, just a note from the school board's lawyer at the time. Incident deemed closed at family's request. Dated March 12, 1979. Just 2 months after Olivia's last diary entry, the woman added, opening a drawer. "I also found this. A school property inventory. Before they closed the building, they made a clear-out list. One item in the chapel basement storage reads, Lou Records, Chapel Interviews/1979. Maybe audio. Maybe VHS." Emily Carter looked up, her heart quickening. "Still at the school?" The woman shrugged. "Probably in a box somewhere. But the chapel basement did have a storage area. On the blueprints, it's called archive storage. It's not on the main student access map. It was used for private materials, disciplinary cases, board minutes." Emily Carter nodded slowly. "A hidden staircase, a stone room, scratch names. They used it." She thanked the woman and left the office, clutching the folders tightly. Her thoughts raced as she crossed the sidewalk and got back into her car. She needed to talk to someone who had been at Blackwood at that time. Someone who hadn't disappeared or been silenced. By late afternoon, Emily Carter stood at the edge of a wooded cul-de-sac near town, where old faculty homes had been converted into private residences. She rang the doorbell of the last cottage, the nameplate beside it still engraved in brass, Miss Davis. Miss Davis had been a literature teacher at the school for over 30 years. Rumor had it she was one of the last active faculty members to resign before the school closed. Emily Carter adjusted her bag on her shoulder as the door creaked open. "Yes, Miss Davis. My name is Emily Carter. I'm cataloging records at Blackwood for the Historical Board. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about 1979. The woman on the other side of the door was in her 70s, her hair white but neatly styled, her eyes sharp and clear. She studied Emily Carter for a long moment before opening the door wider. I suppose it was only a matter of time. Inside, the house was neat and modest. Books lined the shelves, most of them classics and annotated volumes. In the kitchen, a kettle whistled softly, filling the air with warmth. "Did you know Olivia Bennett?" Emily Carter asked after a pause. "I taught both Bennett girls," Davis replied, pouring water into 2 mugs. "Olivia and Abigail Stone. Identical names on the attendance sheets, but completely different children. Olivia was thoughtful, reserved. Abigail had an imagination that got her into trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Davis handed Emily Carter a cup of tea and sat opposite her. "She believed in things no one else could see. Said there were voices in the chapel. Said the priest, Father Michael, made her lie about something. Her parents didn't believe her. Neither did the board." Emily Carter's stomach tightened with foreboding. "What happened to her?" "She died," Davis said dryly. "At least, that's what we were told." "You didn't believe it?" "No," Davis said after a pause. "I believed she was locked away. Perhaps not literally, but kept out of sight. I think Olivia knew it too. After Abigail Stone disappeared, Olivia stopped speaking for days. Then she started writing." "The diary?" "Yes." Davis's eyes sharpened. "You found it?" Emily Carter nodded slowly. "Behind a bricked-up wall in the library. She said she was being watched. She said something about chapel interviews." Davis sighed and looked away. "The board did something that year. There were rumors of corrective therapy. I don't know what they were doing in there, but it wasn't teaching. I tried to ask questions. I was told to focus on my work or resign. So I did. And now, the woman looked at Emily Carter with a tired, bitter smile. I've lived long enough to know that the truth only comes out when it's inconvenient for someone. Emily Carter reached into her bag and pulled out the keyhole-shaped locket. Does this look familiar? Davis gasped. Where did you get that? It was under the table in the hidden room. The one with the name scratched on the wall. I gave that to Abigail, Davis whispered. She wore it to chapel every day. She said it made her feel safe. Emily Carter stared at the locket, her pulse quickening. There's more, isn't there? She asked. Recordings. Something recorded. Go to the chapel annex, Davis said. The school kept a cabinet there. If the building hasn't swallowed it, you might find what's left. That night, Emily Carter couldn't sleep. She sat at the small table in the rented cottage. The diary was open to a torn page near the end. He asked me again if I remembered what happened. I told him no, but it was a lie. I remember everything. I remember Abigail screaming in the chapel. I remember Miss Davis crying when they took her away. And I remember what he whispered when the lights went out. No one leaves until they are forgotten. Emily Carter turned the page. I think he wants me to disappear too. Her hand trembled slightly as she closed the diary. Outside, the wind was picking up. The ivy scratched softly at the window. Tomorrow, she would go back. The sky was already tinged with morning light when Emily Carter arrived at Blackwood. Her flashlight beam cut through the fog as she walked across the yard, past broken benches and rusted bike racks. The main hall echoed with her every step, amplifying the sense of solitude. Today, she didn't stop at the library. She didn't linger in the dormitory wing or look at the old blackboards. She headed straight for the chapel and deeper, into its hidden depths. Emily Carter purposefully approached the altar, kneeling to unlock the small hidden door with the key locket. The mechanism clicked with a soft, almost reluctant sigh. She slipped through the passage again, down the narrow steps leading into the old stone room. But this time, she noticed something new. To the left, a section of the wall was paneled with narrow planks, wooden, warped, but unmistakably part of a cabinet, partially built into the masonry. Her flashlight caught a small brass pull. She tugged. At first, it stuck, swollen from years of dampness. She pulled harder, and the panel finally yielded with a groan, revealing a cabinet cavity about chest-high with several shelves inside. On the top shelf, still intact despite decades of dust and decay, lay 4 cassette tapes in faded plastic cases. Each was marked with white labels in the same neat, typewritten font. Chapel Interview Stone A, Chapel Interview Bennett O, Observation Notes February 13, 1979, Final Interview FM Confidential. Emily Carter exhaled shakily and reached for the tapes. Beneath them lay a notebook with a cracked leather binding. On the cover, Blackwood Student Psychological Records. Spring Semester, 1979. She held the items carefully in her hands, as if they were sacred relics capable of revealing long-forgotten secrets. Back at the cottage, Emily Carter didn't even take off her coat before setting up her old cassette player, which she had brought from New York for recording oral histories. She inserted the first tape, Chapel Interview Stone A. There was a hissing sound, then a click. A woman's voice spoke first, calm and clinical. Session 3, February 5th. Interview with Abigail Stone. Present, myself, Nurse Diana Wells, and Father Michael. Then a softer voice, a girl no older than 17. Why do you keep asking me the same questions? I already told you I heard her voice. And what did the voice say, Abigail? She said to stay away from the chapel. That something bad happened there. Abigail, these stories you're telling are concerning the staff. They sound like projections. Fantasies. They're not stories. You know what's down there. And what would that be? A long pause. The room with the scratch names. The one you keep locked up. She was screaming in there. I heard her. I know what you did to her. Click. End of recording. Emily Carter stared at the tape recorder, a sense of desolation washing over her. She reached for the second cassette. Tape 2. Chapel Interview. Bennett O. Session 4. Interview with Olivia Bennett. March 2nd. Olivia, you've been quiet since your sister left. She didn't leave. You took her. Your parents believe she had a psychological episode. You're under stress. That's understandable. Stop telling me how I feel. The tape crackled, then the priest's voice came on. Soft, condescending. Olivia, if Abigail was truly in distress, wouldn't it be better for her to get help? Surely you understand this wasn't punishment. It was protection. You were saying the same things before she disappeared. And you're safe now, aren't you? You're afraid of the chapel. You're afraid of her voice. Silence. Then Olivia whispered, "She said she'd make you remember what you buried." Click. Emily Carter leaned back in her chair, blood pounding in her ears. Buried. Her mind went back to the engraved names, to the mound of discolored earth in the corner of the stone room that she had mistaken for a sunken floor. She pressed play on the third cassette. Tape 3. Observation notes. February 13th, 1979. No interview, just notes. Subject A continues to exhibit dissociative symptoms, progressing to periods of silence lasting over 12 hours. She speaks of visions, a girl in the walls, and names written in bone. She has fabricated a story of being watched by non-existent staff, along with her sister. Requests to cease chapel therapy have been denied. For Father Michael, the program is to continue until Subject A recants or is withdrawn by family. Observation team recommends sedation for next session. Emily Carter stopped the recording. No wonder the death report was never filed. They weren't treating Abigail. They were erasing her existence. The last recording was shorter, barely 30 seconds. Final interview. Confidential. Father Michael's voice. The Bennett girls are more trouble than anticipated. One disappeared. The other has become uncooperative. This must not reach the board. We are not built for this kind of scrutiny. If anyone asks, they ran away. That's all they do. Run. Memory fades faster than records, especially when no one wants to keep them. Click. Emily Carter sat in silence, her fist clenched. She thought of Olivia's diary, the scratched names, the whispers no one believed. .enus. She thought of Abigail, whose voice had been recorded, silenced, locked in a cabinet underground, and yet, somehow, heard. That evening, she returned to the stone room. The sun had begun to set behind the trees, casting long shadows through the chapel's stained glass windows, giving it a mystical appearance. She brought gloves, a trowel, and her flashlight. She knew what she was looking for now. The floor of the stone room had one uneven corner, slightly raised, the earth there darker and softer. Emily Carter knelt and began to dig. 6 inches down, the trowel hit wood. A rotten wooden box, the size of a drawer. She pried it open. Inside were old notebooks, a rag doll with no eyes, and a stack of folded letters, all addressed to A.S., most signed O. She picked up the first letter. "I can't find you. I ask them every day, and they say you're gone, but I know you're not. I heard you last night in the chapel, your voice. You said, tell them the truth. So I will. I will write until someone reads this. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I won't stop trying. Oh." Emily Carter folded the letter back into the box and hugged it to her chest. Then she turned off her flashlight, and for a moment, in the silence of the stone room, she thought she heard a girl's voice, soft and clear. "Thank you." The sun was not yet high when Emily Carter returned to the town hall the next morning. The box of tapes and documents was neatly packed in her bag. She hadn't slept, her mind buzzing with discoveries. The whisper, imagined or not, had lodged itself in her thoughts like a nail in old wood, refusing to be dislodged. Inside, Karen, the archive employee, looked at Emily Carter with wide eyes as she entered. "I found them," Emily Carter said, quietly but distinctly. "The tapes, the records, the letters, the interviews." Karen gestured for her to follow, anticipating the unveiling of long-buried secrets. They sat in the same back room, where a dusty fan whirred softly in the corner, filling the air with a monotonous hum. Emily Carter took the box from her bag and laid its contents one by one on the table. The tapes, the rag doll, the letters. "I need to make this official," she said. "I don't care what the board wants. This isn't just a school story. This is a criminal cover-up." Karen examined the tapes carefully, her lips pressed tightly together. "Father Michael, he died a few years ago. In Seattle. No record of charges ever filed." Emily Carter wasn't surprised. "What about Nurse Wells or the school board members from '79? "I can try to dig," Karen said, "but you'll hit roadblocks. Most of this was buried. I need a full copy of Olivia and Abigail's files. Every record, even the ones they forgot to archive." Karen nodded slowly. "I'll help. But if you're really going to do this," she gestured to the tapes, "you need a platform. This won't just be a footnote. Someone needs to see it." Emily Carter looked at the letter signed. "Oh, I won't stop trying." She stood up. "I know who can help." 2 hours later, she knocked on the door of a cottage on the far edge of town. Marjorie Sterling answered again, wrapped in a cardigan and holding a mug of tea. "So soon. I found the tapes." Sterling silently stepped aside, inviting her in. They listened together in the living room, surrounded by dusty books and framed certificates. Sterling said nothing during the first 2 tapes. But when Olivia's voice faltered on the second recording, saying, "I'll make you remember what you buried," Sterling covered her mouth with her hand and turned away, unable to contain her emotions. "Olivia gave me a notebook once," she said softly. "After Abigail disappeared," she said, "if anything happens, keep this safe." I never looked inside. I was afraid. She left the room and returned a moment later with a sealed envelope, yellowed and cracked with age. Emily Carter carefully opened it. Inside was a school notebook, its pages filled with drawings, timelines, snippets of poetry, and even pasted-in letters. One page held a map, a rough drawing of the chapel, the secret room, and a crypt. Another showed sketches of names scratched on the walls, the same ones Emily Carter had seen. At the very end was a poem, written in uneven handwriting. She sang in the chapel, where no one believed. A girl with no records, the one never grieved. They buried her name and erased her face, but she waits in the silence in that cursed place. Emily Carter's hands trembled. She documented everything, she said. She was terrified, Sterling replied. But she was also determined. "You're the first person who's ever followed this trail." Emily Carter looked up. "Will you help me take this to the board? I'll testify. I'll sign any affidavit you want. But don't trust them to do the right thing. Not unless the public sees it too." That night, Emily Carter drafted a letter to the Massachusetts Department of Education. Subject: Formal Inquiry. Blackwood Academy Student Deaths 1979. Attached: audio recordings of chapel interviews with Olivia Bennett and Abigail Stone. Psychological observation reports from 1979. Witness testimony from former faculty member Marjorie Sterling, unregistered death report for Abigail Stone, personal letters, and documented timeline. Burial site beneath chapel annex. Requesting formal investigation into wrongful death, record falsification, and institutional abuse. Please confirm receipt. Emily Carter, Historical Research Consultant, Springfield Preservation Board, by contract. She attached a copy of the folder and clicked Send. Then she opened a blank document and began to write something else. A story, without footnotes or institutional formatting. A narrative. The girl who disappeared. The other who fought to remember her. The school that chose silence over truth. The next morning, she arrived at Blackwood, she thought, for the last time. The morning was unusually quiet, and for a moment, she paused at the edge of the yard, just listening to the whisper of the wind and the rustle of leaves. She walked slowly down the corridor, past the marble walls, the dusty library, and the bricked-up wall that had once hidden the diary, down the chapel steps into the stone room. She stood in the spot where the box had been buried. She affixed a small plaque to the wall, wrapped in protective laminate, in memory of Abigail Stone. 1962 to 1979, silenced, forgotten, found. May your voice ring louder than those who buried it. Then, finally, Emily Carter stood in the glow of the chapel's stained glass, looking at the faces of the saints. This time, they seemed to look back at her, as if approving of her actions. 3 days passed before the school board responded. The email arrived without fanfare, a simple text message in Emily Carter's inbox, lost between newsletters and automated bills. Subject: Inquiry regarding historical materials. Blackwood. Ms. Carter, thank you for forwarding your findings. We are currently reviewing the material. Given the sensitive nature of the documentation, we have referred the matter to legal counsel for assessment and appropriate response. We currently request that you refrain from further publication or disclosure of this material pending the completion of our review. Board of Trustees, Springfield Educational Foundation. Emily Carter stared at the message. It was polite. It was vague. And it was a threat. She forwarded the email to Karen and Marjorie Sterling with one line at the bottom. They want me to be quiet. Karen called 5 minutes later. It's their way of warning you. But they can't touch you, Emily Carter. Not if you make this public. I'm not afraid, she said, and it was true. But she also hadn't slept, anticipating the events to come. Maybe not, Karen said, but I'd still be careful. Emily Carter looked at her wall, where she had pinned printouts of the scratched names, Olivia's sketches, and copies of diary entries. It wasn't a conspiracy board, but it looked very much like one. She opened her blog draft. Headline: She Didn't Run Away. What Blackwood Tried to Bury by Emily Carter. For over 4 decades, Abigail Stone's disappearance was quietly explained by officials as a runaway case. No autopsy, no investigation, No closure. But Abigail didn't run away. I found the tapes, the records, the personal letters. I spoke to people who were there. And now, 46 years later, it's time for us to hear what was never meant to be heard. She clicked publish. The story exploded overnight. By noon, regional news agencies were calling. By evening, the article had been shared over 10,000 times. Journalists, cold case researchers, and even former Blackwood students began speaking out online. Some posted old class photos. Some remembered Abigail, quiet, pale, always drawing. Others said they had completely forgotten her until they read the name. That night, Emily Carter received an anonymous message. They'll try to bury it again. Be careful when you walk alone. She stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. The next morning, the board released an official statement. While we acknowledge that materials from 1979 have surfaced, the Board of Trustees wishes to clarify that these records do not reflect the current mission or activities of the Springfield Educational Foundation. The leadership at that time is no longer affiliated with the institution, and many key individuals have passed away. We are fully cooperating with local authorities in any historical investigation. We ask the public to respect the privacy of the families involved as we conduct this delicate review. Emily Carter read the statement 3 times. It was cautious, sanitized, and empty. But the story had already caught fire, and there was no stopping it. And then came the message she hadn't expected. Message request from Olivia Ben. The notification stunned her. She clicked without hesitation. Hi, my name is Madison Garcia. I'm Olivia's daughter. She passed away in 2012. I've been going through her things recently. I found her diary, the names, the sketches, the chapel. I thought she was writing fiction. But now I see your article. I want to help. I think she wanted someone to know. I think she wanted someone like you. Emily Carter stared at the message. She reread it twice. Olivia had continued to document, even after leaving Blackwood, even after the silence. 2 days later, Emily Carter met Madison Garcia at a coffee shop outside New York. Madison Garcia was in her early 30s, with sharp cheekbones and her mother's dark eyes. She brought a cardboard box full of notebooks and letters. Olivia's personal archive. Emily Carter helped her sort through them for hours. She never talked about her sister, Madison Garcia said. Only in small ways, a song she liked, a nickname she used for me. Hey, I always thought it was short for Emma. Emily Carter opened one notebook. At the top of a page was written, they took her because they could, but they didn't account for memory being louder than silence. Later that evening, as Emily Carter drove back to Springfield, her phone vibrated with a call from Marjorie Sterling. She answered on speakerphone. Emily Carter, the older woman said, her voice strained. The demolition has been moved up. What? It was scheduled for 2 more weeks. They posted notices today. Hazard warning, asbestos threat. They're sealing off the campus by Monday. Emily Carter gripped the steering wheel tighter. They're going to demolish the chapel. Yes. Then I need to get in there before they do. Don't go alone, Sterling warned. They've covered this up before. They'll do it again. That night, Emily Carter parked at the edge of the Blackwood Woods. The gates were locked. Signs were posted, but she knew the old gardener's path, the one that wound through the trees and led behind the chapel. She walked it by moonlight, her bag slung over her shoulder, flashlight in one hand. She reached the stone building just before midnight. The front doors were chained shut, but a back door was ajar. Emily Carter entered. The air now smelled different, like solvent and dust. Someone had been here, and then she saw it. The stone room beneath the chapel had been cleaned. The names on the wall washed away with acid. The burial site empty. The plaque she had left was gone. Only one thing remained. A piece of paper, tacked to the wall with a single thumbtack, with a crooked message in black marker. She didn't run away. She's still here. You're next. Emily Carter didn't sleep. She didn't go home. Instead, she sat in her car on the side of the narrow road that wound behind the Blackwood grounds. Headlights off, fingers trembling slightly around a thermos she couldn't bring herself to open. The note still lay on the passenger seat beside her, its thick black handwriting taunting her. She didn't run away. She's still here. You're next. Before leaving, she had photographed the chapel, walls freshly washed, names scraped away, the burial site disturbed, the plaque she had placed in Abigail's memory gone, not stolen, but removed, just like the record of Abigail's life. This was no longer just institutional neglect. Someone was still watching, still invested, and that meant someone who had been there in 1979 was still alive and still covering their tracks. The next morning, Emily Carter met Karen at the town hall. They spoke in whispers, as if afraid of being overheard. "Are you absolutely sure no one but board members had access to those records?" Emily Carter asked. Karen didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "There's one name that keeps coming up in old maintenance logs. Not a teacher, not clergy, just listed as grounds and repairs supervisor." She handed over a photocopy from a personnel file. Name, Franklin H. Miller. Position, maintenance supervisor, 1965 to 1990. Last known address, Mill Creek Apartments, Unit 102, Springfield. Note, requested permanent facility access upon retirement. Request granted for chapel keys only, 1990 to 1993. Emily Carter stared at the entry. He had access to the chapel for 3 years after retirement. Is he still alive? Karen nodded slowly. If so, he's one of the last ones with unrestricted access back then. Emily Carter didn't hesitate. Mill Creek Apartments had seen better decades. The complex sagged in the way buildings only do after a long, slow decline. Paint half-peeled, balconies rusted, a bulletin board thick with yellowed notices. She knocked on the door of apartment 102. A long pause. Then, "Who is it?" "Mr. Miller, my name is Emily Carter. I'm working with the Preservation Board. I wanted to ask you about Blackwood Academy." Silence.enus. She heard the click of a bolt, but the door didn't open fully, just a narrow crack. A single bloodshot eye peered out from behind the chain. "Blackwood's gone." "Not yet." He didn't reply. "I know what happened to the Bennett sisters," Emily Carter said softly. "I know about the interviews. About the room under the chapel. I found the tapes." Another pause. A long one. Then the door closed. Chain slid. When the door opened again, she saw a man in his 80s, thin, slightly stooped, but with a sharp gaze despite the tremor in his hands. He gestured her in without a word. His apartment smelled of old wooden books, like a library about to collapse in on itself. The windows were curtained, plunging the room into semi-darkness. The walls were bare, devoid of any adornment. In the center of the room, a recliner sat next to a dusty table piled with newspapers and pill bottles. "You found the room?" he asked. Emily Carter nodded. "You shouldn't have gone back there alone." "I didn't have a choice," he said, slowly rubbing his hands. "They made me keep it clean down there. After they said it was just storage, but I saw the scratches. I heard the sounds. There were nights I'd lock up, and I'd hear someone under the floorboards. You knew what was happening to the girls." "I knew enough." His eyes darkened. "Father Michael and that nurse, they called it therapy. Said it was for the troubled ones, but they just took the ones who didn't conform. Why didn't you say anything?" "I was a janitor," he said dryly. "I saw things. I kept my head down. That's how I stayed alive." Emily Carter looked at him closely. "You were there last night, weren't you?" He didn't answer. "I found your note. I didn't write that." He looked at her, and for the first time, something like fear crossed his face. "But I saw someone else there in the woods, watching. They weren't part of the school, not officially." Emily Carter's voice dropped. "Who?" He hesitated. "I only knew her as Miller. She wasn't staff. I think she was brought in from the outside. A private consultant or something. Came and went at night. Always wore gloves. And never spoke to the students openly. Only one-on-one sessions. Do you know where she is now?" She was quiet, careful, but not careful enough. "She left something behind." He slowly stood and shuffled to a corner of the room, where an old trunk sat beneath a plastic sheet. He opened it and rummaged inside. From it, he pulled out a plastic badge holder. Inside, a faded photo ID. Marjorie Sterling, Blackwood Auxiliary Staff. Spring semester 1979. Access, private sessions. After Olivia disappeared, Miller said softly, "I found this in the incinerator." I think she thought it burned. Emily Carter took the ID and flipped it over. On the back, a series of numbers were scratched in pen. "Do you know what this means?" she asked. He shook his head. "Maybe a case. Maybe a patient number. But if she's still out there, I'll tell you this, she won't want to be found." Emily Carter slipped the ID into her bag. That night, she returned to her cottage. Emily Carter uploaded everything to 3 separate cloud accounts and scheduled a second blog post to go live at midnight, just in case. She typed quickly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Someone is still watching. Someone is still out there who doesn't want this truth to come out. And now I have her name, Marjorie Sterling. She was there in 1979. She worked with the missing girls. She called it therapy, but the only thing they were being treated for was disobedience. She clicked schedule. Then she turned off the lights, double-checked the locks, and went to bed with the locket, Abigail's locket, under her pillow, just in case. Marjorie Sterling had no social media presence. No Facebook profiles, no LinkedIn entries, no photos tagged by friends or family. Her name had vanished from public records sometime in the early 1990s, right after Blackwood closed. But Emily Carter had the ID, and the number on the back wasn't random. After hours of searching online in court archives and newspaper scans, she found it, buried in a forgotten database of state-issued practitioner licenses from the late 1970s. Sterling Marjorie A. License number 44731. Provisional Psychological Consultant, issued February 1978. Suspended June 1980. Reason: ethical violations, details unavailable. Last known address: Dover, Massachusetts. The moment Emily Carter saw it, she knew Sterling hadn't disappeared. She had just gone underground. Dover was a 4-hour drive. Emily Carter made it in 3.5. She parked in front of a weathered blue house set back on a quiet country road. Overgrown shrubs framed the front porch. A rusty mailbox leaned to one side, its flag long gone. There was no car in the driveway, but smoke drifted from the chimney, indicating a presence inside. She knocked once. No answer. She knocked again. A curtain in the left window shifted slightly. Someone was home. Emily Carter called through the door. "Mrs. Sterling, my name is Emily Carter. I need to talk to you about Blackwood Academy." Silence. Then, after a long pause, the door cracked open. The woman who appeared was in her late 80s, dressed in a heavy cardigan and thick wool socks, her white hair pulled back in a bun. Her eyes were pale and unfocused, but they focused on Emily Carter with unnerving precision. "Why now?" she said. Emily Carter's heart skipped a beat. "You know why." Sterling stepped aside, inviting her in. Inside, the house was surprisingly clean, modest, quiet, but well-maintained. A wood-burning stove glowed faintly in the corner, radiating warmth. The walls were mostly bare, save for a few water-stained paintings. Landscapes, all in shades of gray, created a melancholic mood. "I don't talk about the past," Sterling said as Emily Carter entered. "You already have," Emily Carter replied and placed the photo ID on the kitchen table. The old woman flinched slightly, as if struck. "I found the tapes," Emily Carter added. "I heard Abigail. I heard Olivia. I read the diary. I saw the wall." Sterling slowly sat down, her face etched with weariness. "Olivia kept digging," she said, even after the school told her to stop. Even after the chapel was closed to students. "I tried to warn them, you know. I said the girl was unstable. Abigail, all of them," she said almost to herself. "They thought they were stronger than the system. That's the worst mistake." Emily Carter's pulse quickened. "What kind of therapy was it, Marjorie?" Sterling looked up sharply. "You think we hurt them?" "I know you did." She studied Emily Carter for a long moment. "We were told they were dangerous. Not criminal, not broken, just disruptive. They wouldn't conform. They resisted the rituals, the structure, the prayer groups. Olivia was too quiet. Abigail was a dreamer. She said she saw people who weren't there. You drugged them. You isolated them." "We followed orders," Sterling said, her voice suddenly cold. "We were trained to report deviations, not indulge them." "Deviations?" Emily Carter repeated, disbelieving. Sterling's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "Olivia wrote about you. You know, or someone like you. She said there would always be another." Emily Carter's hand hovered over her bag, ready for action. "I didn't kill anyone," Sterling said. "No, but you helped bury them." Sterling's pale eyes narrowed. "And now you want to exhume everything, dig it up for strangers. What do you think that will accomplish?" Emily Carter stood. "I think people deserve the truth, especially those who didn't survive to tell it." Sterling said nothing. Emily Carter turned to leave. "Wait," the old woman said. "I want to give you something." Emily Carter froze. Sterling slowly walked to a cabinet in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer, pulled out a thin black journal, and held it out. "I kept records," she said. "Unauthorized, unofficial. I wrote them because I had to. I started having dreams about the girls. Even after I left, Olivia, Abigail, there was another one. A third girl. Her name was Lily. No one ever reported her missing." Emily Carter took the journal with trembling hands. "I don't expect forgiveness," Sterling said. "I know what I did. You didn't stop them." "I didn't stop," she admitted. "But I couldn't stop her either." Emily Carter's brow furrowed. "Her." Sterling's eyes became distant, as if she was lost in memory. There was someone above the board, a benefactor, a private donor. She came once a month, sat in on assessments, told us which students had the right temperament for correction. Who? She never gave a real name, just initials. EA, and she always wore gloves. Emily Carter stared, trying to piece together the fragments of information. Do you have anything of hers? Sterling shook her head. She never left a trace. Emily Carter slipped the journal into her bag. She does now. That night, back in Springfield, Emily Carter sat in her cottage with the journal open on her lap. Sterling's handwriting was neat and efficient, notes condensed into small margins. March 1st, 1979. Abigail refused again, locked herself in the chapel, screamed when approached, scratched Olivia's name on the wall. Olivia says they've been talking in dreams, hallucination, or trauma response. Michael believes Abigail is destabilizing others. Full removal suggested. March 4th. Olivia found the ledger. How? She says she told her about the room under the altar. Refuses to say who. There's another one. She says, a third voice. Emily Carter turned the page. At the bottom, in shaky pen, was written, I saw the girl again. Not Abigail, not Olivia. The one in the walls, the one we never named. The sun had barely risen when Emily Carter returned to the chapel. It was sealed. A heavy padlock was affixed to the front door handles, and a notice was tacked over it. Demolition zone. No entry. But the back trail still existed. The old gardener's path through the woods, overgrown but passable. She took it. The black journal pressed against her chest like a talisman. Sterling's last entry burned in her mind. I saw the girl again. Not Abigail, not Olivia. The one in the walls, the one we never named. The chapel door groaned as she pushed it. The lock was gone, cut, or broken. Someone else had been here recently. Emily Carter entered and paused. Something had changed. The air was warm, damp, and smelled of lilacs. Not dust, not decay, but lilacs. The same scent she remembered from one of Olivia's diary entries. She left lilacs at the altar, said they soothed the voice. Emily Carter quickly descended the chapel steps, flashlight in hand. The stone room below was as dark and empty as before. The wall had been washed, yes, but the inscriptions were still faintly visible, like bruises beneath the skin. And there, beneath the spot where she had found the box, was something new. A child's drawing, folded, tucked between two loose floor stones. Emily Carter picked it up and carefully unfolded the paper. Crayon on faded construction paper, drawn by a small child's unsteady hand. A stick figure inside a chapel. A wall covered in scribbles. And behind the wall, a second figure, smaller, half-erased, eyes like empty circles. At the bottom of the page, me and her. She lives in the wall. No name. Back at the cottage, Emily Carter laid the drawing next to Sterling's journal, Olivia's diary, and the tapes. Each thread led her closer, but they no longer converged on Abigail or even Olivia. They converged on someone else. A third girl, a lost case, a student who was never enrolled. No photo, no signature. She called Karen at the town hall. Can you check the admissions logs again? Emily Carter asked. Look for any names that were withdrawn before the semester began, or any students who were placed at Blackwood unofficially. Karen sighed. That's not how it works, Emily Carter. If they weren't enrolled, they're not in the system. What about ghost records? Karen was silent. Ghost records? Well, placeholder files used when a name is omitted or records are classified. A long silence hung on the line. Then give me an hour. The call came 40 minutes later. Karen's voice was strained, clipped. I found one. Emily Carter straightened. What's the name? No name. It's a blank file, just a number. BS 794. C. No photo, no parent information, no room assignment, but it's listed as restricted session participant. Same program code as Abigail's. Emily Carter's blood ran cold. That's her. The file is dated January 6, 1979. The same week Abigail started her therapy sessions. Where's the file? Now, Emily Carter asked. Withdrawn, Karen replied. Archived in off-site storage. And you'll love this. The archiving request was made in 1983 by a certain Eleanor Ainsworth. Ainsworth, Emily Carter whispered. The benefactor, the woman Sterling described. The one above it all. Can you get me the address for the storage facility? Emily Carter asked. I'll try, but be careful, Emily Carter. If this woman is real and still alive, she's been one step ahead this whole time. I know, Emily Carter said. That's why I'm going to catch up to her. The archive storage facility was located in an industrial park on the outskirts of town. It was 3 acres of beige concrete boxes and humming lights. Emily Carter signed in at the front desk, showed her temporary research credentials, and was led to a climate-controlled room where 6 rows of shelving stretched to the ceiling. The boxes are labeled BS 794C, the clerk said. But we don't open sealed state records. You'll need written authorization to access. Emily Carter nodded politely. Of course. As soon as the clerk left, she acted quickly. She found the right shelf, middle row, box 794C, secured with a padlock. Emily Carter noticed that the corner of the lid had been recently disturbed, the seal torn, the glue fresh. Someone had already looked inside. Emily Carter pulled out her lock-picking kit, the one she kept for drawer emergencies, as she told herself, and went to work. 30 seconds later, the lock clicked open. She lifted the lid. Inside lay a single, heavy paper folder. Emily Carter slowly opened it. It was the redacted student file for BS 794C, subject placed in care under donor-funded cognitive rehabilitation initiative. Behavioral profile, withdrawn, nonverbal, drawn to chapel. Found creating patterns on basement walls.enus. Subject denied access to all common areas. Staff directive, isolate. Document, observe. Subject's name withheld. Status, in-facility death, unregistered. Recommendation, no official record. No burial record. Mark as institutional loss and conceal. Emily Carter stared at the words in-facility death, unregistered. So there was a third girl, and they had erased her entire existence. On the last page was a photograph, not a school portrait, but just a blurry black and white surveillance shot. A girl, perhaps 9 or 10, stood at the edge of a shadowed corridor, eyes wide, staring directly into the camera. No name, just a piece of tape at the bottom. The silent one. Emily Carter recoiled from the box. This was the girl Olivia had dreamed of. The girl Sterling had feared, the one Abigail had whispered about in her final sessions. And she had been locked in the chapel long before Olivia or Abigail ever arrived. That night, Emily Carter uploaded her findings to every outlet she could access: local news, national missing persons databases, and her own material. She titled it, The Girl Who Wasn't There. In it, she included everything: the sealed file, the nameless photograph, the archival directive to conceal, Sterling's journal, Olivia's sketches, the crayon drawing. She ended with one line: someone erased her name. I won't. Then she clicked publish. For a long time, Emily Carter sat in the silence of her cottage. At 3:14 a.m., her phone vibrated. No number, just a single message. You should stop digging. Some names are meant to stay buried. Emily Carter stared at the screen, then typed back, not this one. The fallout was immediate. Within 24 hours of Emily Carter's publication about the silent one, local reporters descended on Springfield. National outlets followed. And suddenly, the school board, the very one that had tried to ignore her, panicked. They released a hasty statement. We are aware of recently surfaced materials concerning unregistered student cases at Blackwood Academy. An independent expert panel will be established. We extend our condolences to the affected families. But there were no families listed, because the girl in the photograph, the silent one, had no official name. The next day, Karen called. Someone broke into the archive storage facility. Emily Carter's heart sank. What did they take? Technically nothing, but all files related to BS 794C were accessed, and the digital copy was deleted. Who has access? Only 3 people, and I'm one of them. Emily Carter's voice tightened. Who's the third? Karen hesitated. Eleanor Ainsworth. Emily Carter almost dropped the phone. She's still on the board? She never left, Karen said. She doesn't attend meetings, but she signs the checks. Quiet power. Emily Carter's fingers tightened on the armrest. She always was. Emily Carter knew this would happen eventually. The face behind the curtain, the one who orchestrated it all, the therapy, the isolation, the erased student. But knowing her name wasn't enough. She needed proof. She needed something Eleanor couldn't explain away. So Emily Carter did the only thing she could think of. She went back to Blackwood. It was just past midnight when she arrived, flashlight in hand, bag slung over her shoulder. Fog lay low over the grass, creating an eerie atmosphere. The chapel doors were still sealed with yellow caution tape, but someone had already cut through it. Inside, the air felt electrified, as if it remembered her. She descended the narrow stairs into the stone room below. This time, She wasn't looking for what was buried, but what was missed. She tapped the far wall with the handle of her flashlight, listening for hollows. Then she heard it, a different echo, faint, almost imperceptible. Emily Carter knelt and pressed her ear to the stone. Silence. Then, a faint breath. Emily Carter froze. It was impossible. But there it was again, not wind, not plumbing, but breathing. She stood, heart pounding, and examined the wall closely. There, beneath the very bottom row of bricks, was a barely visible seam. She reached into her bag for the crowbar. The stone yielded more easily than expected. Behind the narrow opening, low and dark, a small, cell-like room was revealed. Inside, there was a child's mattress, a broken doll, a chain attached to the wall, and the words, "I am here. I am here. I am here," scratched into the stone thousands of times. Emily Carter recoiled, realizing the girl had not merely been isolated, but imprisoned. Soon, footsteps sounded overhead, heavy, measured. Someone else was in the chapel. Emily retreated back into the crawl space, sliding the stone back into place, leaving only a small crack. Turning off her flashlight, she held her breath. The footsteps slowly descended, stopping at the foot of the stairs. Then a voice echoed through the room, cold and calm. "Miss Carter, I know you're here." The voice belonged to Eleanor Ainsworth. She accused Emily of making a fuss, misunderstanding, and making assumptions. Eleanor stated that Emily should never have found the file, and that the girl should never have been found because she was a donation. When Emily asked what she would gain by exposing this, Eleanor replied that some truths are heavier than others, and that people don't want to know that a child lived in darkness while they prayed upstairs. She expressed confidence that one day she would be thanked for concealing this information. Unable to bear it any longer, Emily pushed the stone aside and emerged. Eleanor Ainsworth stood in the middle of the room, regal in a black coat, her eyes sharp and uncompromising. Emily, her voice trembling but loud, declared, "I know what you did." Eleanor didn't flinch, responding, "Then you know what I'm capable of." In the distance, police sirens wailed. Emily, without smiling, said, "Good. Then you know they're already on their way." The police arrived within minutes. Eleanor Ainsworth offered no resistance and said nothing as she was handcuffed. Her face remained impassive, like marble. Emily Carter handed the lead officer the file from the storage facility, the photographs, and her own recording of Eleanor Ainsworth's voice, captured on a small microphone. The phrase, "This girl was never meant to be found because she was never part of the school. She was a donation," echoed through the precinct and the courthouse in the weeks that followed. It made headlines, eroded trust, and changed Springfield forever. Days after Eleanor's arrest, investigators discovered a private ledger hidden in a locked drawer of her estate. Inside were coded references to payments, special placements, and psychological conditioning procedures. It was revealed that more girls had passed through Blackwood stone walls than the school had ever officially admitted. Some were relocated, some disappeared. A few had no names at all. Public outcry forced the Springfield Educational Foundation to disband. The land Blackwood stood on was seized by the state pending further investigation. Demolition was indefinitely postponed. Then came the task of remembrance. On a clear spring morning, Emily Carter stood in the center of the chapel. There was no press, no cameras, no speeches, just her, Karen, Marjorie Sterling, Madison Garcia, and a simple plaque being installed in the stone room below. It read, "In memory of the nameless." She did not run away. She did not forget. We remember. Above the plaque hung Olivia Bennett's sketch of the chapel, framed under glass. The crayon drawing of the girl in the wall was displayed beside it, no longer lost, no longer silent. Weeks later, Emily Carter published the full story in print. A voluminous exposé titled "The Girl Who Wasn't on the Roster" appeared in national magazines, academic journals, and eventually, school psychology textbooks. She held nothing back. Olivia's fear, Abigail's fate, Sterling's complicity, Ainsworth's control. Emily Carter knew that truth was only as powerful as you were willing to share it, and silence had already buried enough girls. On the last page of her book, Emily Carter included an excerpt from Olivia's last known letter, never sent, folded between the pages of a novel among her belongings. It read, "If anyone finds this, please don't forget her. Not the one in the picture, but the one in the wall." She was small, quiet, always watching. She never spoke a word, but she was louder than all of us. Her name was never spoken, so I gave her one. I named her Hope. A year later, the Blackwood grounds reopened as a state historical site. The chapel remained untouched, its walls now adorned with panels detailing the truth. Visitors came quietly, often with their daughters. At the altar stood a small bronze statue, a girl with her eyes closed, one hand pressed to the wall, listening. Beneath it, a single word was engraved: hope. And Emily Carter was finally able to sleep again, not because the ghosts were gone, but because someone was finally listening.